remember that day like it was yesterday. The day my entire world felt like it had cracked open, spilling secrets, control, and anger in every direction. It started like any ordinary morning, with sunlight slipping through the blinds and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. But the calm, familiar comfort of home was a lie. I just didn't know it yet. Mom came into my room, not with a greeting, but with a look. One of those looks that could freeze your blood without a word. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and behind them I could see that familiar hunger for control. She had found out something she shouldn't have, something private, something that belonged only to me. And that apparently was enough to ignite the storm. "You need to think about your life," she said, standing in the doorway like a judge delivering a verdict. Her voice was soft but carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "You can't just do whatever you want." "You know better than that." I froze. My stomach twisted. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I was capable, that I could make my own choices. But before I could speak, she continued, stepping into my room like she owned it, which, in her mind, she did. "I know how much money you've been making lately," she said, her tone calm but dangerous. "And I think it's time you—" "Share it," I blinked. Did she just— My heart pounded, disbelief mixing with a cold, rising anger. Share it with her? After everything, after years of being treated like a child, after her constant rules, criticism, and interference? My hands shook, but I tried to steady myself. I don't understand," I managed, my voice small, almost trembling. "You know exactly what I mean," she said, leaning against my desk. "You can't just ignore your responsibilities. Family comes first, family." That word had been used as a weapon more times than I could count. Every decision, every plan I had for myself, every dream I dared to imagine, she twisted it into something selfish if I didn't include her, something wrong if I didn't obey. And now she had crossed a line I never thought she would. I wanted to shout, to tell her she had no right, that my life was mine. But fear, confusion, and a deep-rooted sense of obligation held my words hostage. I felt trapped in a room that was supposed to be my sanctuary. My sanctuary had become her arena, and then as if on cue, the door opened again. My brother, the spoiled, pampered golden child of the house, walked in. Mom smiled at him in a way that made my blood boil, a smile reserved only for those she could manipulate. "You'll help me talk to them," she said, gesturing toward me, her plan already unfolding. I realized then that this wasn't just about money. This was about power, control, and humiliation. She wanted to prove something, not just to me, but to herself, to the world, that I was hers to command. That no matter how old I got, no matter how independent I tried to be, I would always bow to her rules. I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, hurt, disbelief, and, surprisingly, clarity. This was my breaking point. I could feel it like a spark igniting deep inside me, a warning that something had to change. Something drastic. Something that would make her, and everyone else, finally understand that I was not a puppet in their family theater. As they stood there expecting compliance, I made a choice. Not a loud, dramatic choice, not yet. But a quiet, simmering decision that would grow with every day, every interaction, every insult disguised as advice. I would not let her destroy my life, my independence, or my peace of mind. And I knew deep down that when the time came, I would make her regret the moment she underestimated me. The room was silent for a few long seconds. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Mom smiled, thinking she had already won. My brother, oblivious as ever, looked at me expectantly, waiting for compliance, and I just stood there, and that's when I realized something terrifying and exciting. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was alive, fully aware, fully awake, fully ready. That moment, the look in her eyes, the smugness on his face, the tension that crackled like electricity in the room, was the moment everything changed. My life, my family, and everything I thought I knew about control and betrayal had just shifted. And I had no idea how far this storm would go, or how satisfying it would feel to watch it unfold. But one thing was certain, I would never be the same again. Living under Mom's control wasn't just inconvenient. It was exhausting, suffocating, and relentless. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope over a pit of judgment. One wrong word, one misstep, and suddenly I was in trouble, my dreams dismissed, my choices invalidated. She had a way of making everything about her approval. Even the smallest things, what I wore, what I ate, how I spent my weekends, were scrutinized. If I tried to assert myself even politely, her voice would sharpen, and suddenly, I was reminded that I was nothing without her guidance. "You need to rethink that," she would say, folding her arms as if she were folding my will into her hands. "I just want what's best for you." But what she wanted wasn't my best. It was control, power, a way to make sure I never forgot that. In her world, she decided the rules. I remember nights lying awake, listening to the house settle in silence, trying to dream about a life that wasn't dictated by her. I imagined leaving, escaping, building something that was truly mine. But the fear of confrontation, of her judgment, kept me in place. School, work, friendships. They were all filtered through her expectations. My friends learned quickly not to upset her, not to suggest things she didn't approve of. Even my successes were tainted. If I got a promotion, she would say, "It's good, but you're lucky. Don't forget where you came from." If I bought something nice, she would remark on how irresponsible I was. Nothing was ever simply mine. And then there was my brother. Oh, my brother. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Every mistake I made was amplified, every triumph minimized. But if he did the same thing, he was praised, celebrated, and rewarded. Mom had perfected this system of favoritism, and it left me constantly second-guessing myself. Sometimes I tried small acts of rebellion, wearing the wrong outfit, choosing a different route to school, buying something without her permission. The consequences were always swift and cutting. The anger in her voice, the disappointment in her eyes. It wasn't just criticism. It was a weapon, and I felt it sting every single time. The worst part was the constant manipulation. Mom had a way of twisting words, of making me doubt myself. "I'm just trying to protect you," she'd say after tearing down a plan I was excited about. "You don't know what's best." And somehow I would feel guilty for wanting independence. I started to wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe I couldn't make decisions on my own. Maybe I was too naive, too impulsive, too reckless. It wasn't just the big things that got to me, it was the small daily moments that wore me down. The way she would sit in the living room, arms crossed, waiting for me to explain why I hadn't followed her instructions exactly. The way she would hover over my laptop, my phone, my life. The subtle digs at my confidence, the constant comparisons to my brother, the sighs of disappointment whenever I showed a hint of ambition. I became quiet, careful. I learned to navigate the minefield, to smile when she expected it, to nod when she demanded it, to laugh at her jokes even when they cut deep. I became an expert at surviving under her control, but I hated every second of it. And yet, I couldn't shake the anger that bubbled beneath the surface. It wasn't the kind of anger that screams. It's the quiet, burning kind that fuels thoughts and plans, that waits for the right moment to ignite. I started noticing patterns, noticing her weaknesses, the moments when she underestimated me. And with every slight, every manipulation, every act of control, that anger grew stronger. I also started realizing something important. I wasn't alone in this. I had my own voice, my own intelligence, my own sense of justice. For years, I had let Mom's words drown out my own instincts. But slowly, piece by piece, I began listening to myself again. I started remembering what I wanted, who I wanted to be, and what I would no longer accept. Every confrontation, every manipulated scenario, every moment of humiliation was shaping me, preparing me for something bigger. It was hard, exhausting, and painful. But deep down, I knew this struggle wasn't just about survival. It was about awakening. I could see it in the little moments. When I stopped apologizing for existing in my own space. When I began keeping thoughts to myself, planning quietly, observing without revealing too much. I realized that I could play her game better than she imagined. I could navigate her rules while secretly preparing for my own victory. And there were days, long nights, and quiet afternoons when I let myself imagine what it would feel like to finally turn the tables. To have her silenced, surprised, left speechless. To show her that I was not the child she thought she could mold, but a person with my own mind, my own power, and my own destiny. That's when the seed of rebellion was planted. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, growing, and impossible to ignore. I knew that to survive her control, I had to play the long game. I had to endure, observe, and prepare. And one day, the struggle would end. Not with me begging for freedom, but with her facing the consequences of her own actions. Living under her rules was painful, yes. Humiliating, exhausting, and infuriating. But it was also shaping me into someone stronger, sharper, and more determined than I had ever been. And though I couldn't see it yet, I knew that the day was coming when I would no longer be a prisoner in her home, or in her mind. That day was coming. And when it did, everything she had built on control and manipulation would come crashing down around her. There's a subtle shift that happens before everything explodes, the moment when frustration becomes defiance, and defiance becomes inevitable. For me, it started with small acts, almost invisible to the outside eye, but impossible for her to ignore. It wasn't a single event. It was a series of tiny rebellions that built up like a storm cloud gathering strength, each one adding weight, each one daring her to notice. And she did. Oh, she noticed. I remember the first one clearly. I bought something for myself without asking. Something small, harmless by any normal standard. A book I'd been dying to read. When Mom saw it, her smile didn't reach her eyes. She tilted her head, examined it like a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. "You didn't tell me about this," she said softly, the kind of tone that makes your chest tighten. "You should have asked first. You know better." I nodded, pretending to shrink under her scrutiny, but inside, a fire was growing. I realized something that day. I could act small, I could comply outwardly, but I could still make choices that were mine. I could quietly defy her, and it felt liberating. The next act wasn't much bigger, just deciding to eat dinner with friends instead of coming straight home. Simple, normal, reasonable. But for her, it was a breach of the unspoken code she had enforced for years. My life existed for her approval. "Where were you?" she asked later that evening, her voice calm but loaded. "I expected you home." "I went out with friends," I replied, holding her gaze for the first time in a long while. Her silence was sharp. She didn't yell, didn't storm the room. She simply looked at me, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes. I had broken a rule, and she was already plotting her next move. Each small rebellion became a test, and each test revealed cracks in her control. I started noticing how easily she could be rattled, how she tried to reassert dominance without realizing that I was no longer the frightened child I once was. Then came the bigger acts, the ones that truly pushed her over the edge. I started making decisions about my life out in the open, not in secret. I planned a weekend trip with friends. I applied for a promotion at work. I started taking time for myself without announcing every detail to her. The first time she confronted me about it, I could feel her anger simmering just beneath her polite words. "You're acting like this is all about you," she said, pacing the living room. "You're being selfish." I swallowed the lump in my throat and held my ground. "I'm making choices for myself. Isn't that what growing up is about?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise or maybe fear. She hadn't expected me to speak like that, to speak at all. And that small moment of courage was like lighting a fuse. The tension in the house escalated. Every family dinner, every casual conversation became a battlefield. She would criticize, I would respond calmly but firmly. And my brother, loyal to her as always, would step in, either to defend her or to mock me in subtle ways. The walls of my home felt smaller, tighter, suffocating with judgment. It was exhausting, and part of me wanted to retreat, to fall back into compliance. But I couldn't. Every small victory, every moment I asserted myself strengthened me. I started planning, not in an obvious, reckless way, but in quiet, careful calculations. I was learning the art of subtle rebellion. One evening, the final spark ignited. It was a trivial thing, really, a disagreement over money. Mom insisted I give her part of what I had earned, as if my life's work belonged to her. I refused. Calmly, firmly, without shouting, I told her no. The shock in her eyes was immediate. She hadn't expected it, not from me. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again, and I held my ground. For the first time, she realized I wasn't bending. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't afraid. I was done, and in that moment, I saw the moment of truth. The moment when everything shifted. She had controlled me for years, but I had been learning, waiting, building the courage to stand up. That refusal, that single act of defiance, marked the beginning of something irreversible. I knew she would retaliate, of course. Control is never given up easily. But I also knew that the longer I played along, the stronger I would become. Each small act of resistance was a step toward freedom, toward justice, toward the moment when she would finally see me for who I truly was. No longer a child, no longer a puppet, but someone she could not control. That night, I lay awake, heart pounding, thinking about what had just happened. I realized that rebellion wasn't about anger or spite. It was about reclaiming myself. And as I drifted to sleep, I could feel the first threads of a plan weaving themselves in my mind. A plan not born from cruelty but from necessity. A plan that would eventually change everything. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. And that fearlessness, quiet and steady, was about to set the stage for what came next. The betrayal that would make my family take sides, and the revenge that would leave everyone speechless. I always knew that standing up to Mom would come with consequences, but I never imagined how deep the betrayal could run. Because it wasn't just her against me, it was the entire family siding with her without hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something harsh. Sometimes those you love the most can become your greatest obstacle. It started subtly. Whispered comments behind my back, little remarks from relatives that made me question myself. Maybe you should listen to your mother. She knows what's best. At first I brushed them off, but the pattern became clear. My family wasn't neutral. They were her army, armed with judgment and loyalty, ready to reinforce her control. My brother was the first to fully take the side of betrayal. I had always suspected he was spoiled, but now his behavior revealed a crueler edge. Every small victory I celebrated, every act of independence, became an opportunity for him to mock me. Wow, finally deciding to do something without asking Mom first? He'd sneer, smirking as if my defiance were nothing more than childish arrogance. Good luck with that. His words stung, but it was the casual support he gave Mom that cut the deepest. Together they were a team, a wall of control and criticism, leaving me isolated, frustrated, and burning with anger. The first real betrayal came during a family dinner. The kind meant to feel comforting, but instead became a stage for judgment. Mom had prepared a speech, a lecture wrapped in concern. But the aim was unmistakable, to humiliate me in front of everyone. You know, we've always tried to guide you, she said, her voice calm but deadly. But lately it seems like you've forgotten your place. We all just want what's best for you. I could feel the stares of my relatives, some curious, some judgmental, some silently agreeing. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, my brother jumped in. She's right, he said. voice dripping with mock seriousness. You really need to start thinking like an adult. Maybe then we won't have to keep reminding you. I felt the world shift under my feet. The people I had expected to support me, my family, were now my opponents. I wanted to yell, to demand fairness, but something inside me clicked. Anger alone wouldn't win this battle. Strategy would. Patience would. Observation would. For the next few days, the tension in the house became unbearable. Every conversation, every glance, every smile or smirk felt like a calculated move. They were watching me, judging me, waiting for me to slip up. And in their eyes, I realized I already had. It wasn't just Mom and my brother anymore. Cousins, aunts, even my father, who usually stayed quiet, began taking subtle sides. Comments that seemed innocent on the surface carried hidden judgments. I could feel the isolation like a weight pressing on my chest. But as much as the betrayal hurt, it also sharpened something inside me. I could see their weaknesses, their predictability, their arrogance. They assumed I would crumble under their collective pressure. They assumed that I was powerless without allies. And that assumption was exactly what I needed. The betrayal reached its peak one afternoon when Mom demanded I hand over a portion of my earnings again. This time, it wasn't a subtle request disguised as concern. She laid it out like a decree. I owed her, and everyone else would reinforce it. "You know what to do," she said. And my brother smirked from across the room, his expression practically daring me to refuse. I froze, realizing how far it had gone. They weren't just controlling me. They were ganging up, using family loyalty as a weapon. I could feel the blood rush to my head, a mix of anger, frustration, and clarity. And then I saw it. Their arrogance. The way they believed that loyalty, tradition, and control would always keep me in place. They thought they had built walls around me that I could never break. That's when I made my first conscious decision. I would not fight their betrayal with anger. I would fight it with strategy. Every whispered insult, every eye roll, every manipulative comment would be observed, cataloged, and remembered. Every family dinner, every lecture, every attempt to belittle me would be a lesson in patience, a step in a plan they could never see coming. I began small, testing them, pushing boundaries just enough to see their reactions. I started to speak calmly, carefully, and deliberately. I didn't shout or cry. I didn't beg. I simply existed on my terms, quietly but deliberately asserting myself. Each act of composure, each refusal to be manipulated, was a strike against the illusion of their control, and all the while, I watched. I studied the way they talked to each other, the way Mom's voice softened when she thought no one was listening, the way my brother's smirk faltered when caught off guard. Their overconfidence became my advantage. I began to understand something crucial. Betrayal doesn't only hurt, it teaches. It exposes weaknesses, reveals motivations, and creates opportunities. And with that understanding, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Quiet, calculated, and unstoppable power. The family that once made me feel small, powerless, and trapped was now unknowingly providing the blueprint for my revenge. Every act of betrayal, every side taken, was a step closer to the moment when I would turn the tables. And I knew, deep in my bones, that when that moment came, they would be left speechless. For weeks after their betrayal, I lived like someone undercover in my own home. Outwardly, I was calm, polite even. Inside, I was building. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted a clean, indisputable unraveling of everything they'd used to control me. I wanted them to watch the consequences of their choices without being able to point a finger at me and say I'd lost my mind. Revenge, for me, would be surgical. It would be smart, patient, and most importantly, irrefutable. The first rule I set for myself was simple: keep records. If they were going to call me irresponsible, dishonest, or ungrateful, I would have proof to the contrary. I started saving receipts, documenting conversations, and backing up messages. I made notes, dates, words, who was there, what was said. I kept a private journal of patterns. When Mom used guilt, when my brother intervened, how relatives reacted when she orchestrated a scene. If they wanted to paint me as the problem, I would hand them a mirror. The second rule, never lose my cool. Anger is a loud weapon, but a clumsy one. If I screamed, if I raged, I'd become the headline they used to discredit me. So I practiced silence. I learned to answer with measured words, to let their venom fall flat because I refused to feed it. Composure would be my armor and my weapon. When they expected drama, I gave them quiet confidence, and that unsettled them more than any outburst could. Next, I mapped their weaknesses. Mom was all style and stories. She loved how things looked. Image, respect, the illusion of authority. My brother thrived on attention and approval. He would bluster when praised and shrink when exposed. Extended family loved gossip more than facts. Those were my levers. I didn't plan to humiliate anyone for the sake of cruelty. I planned to remove the cover they hid behind: hypocrisy, entitlement, and manipulation. Then I started discreetly redirecting their narrative. When relatives called to ask about my situation, I answered carefully, truthful, but controlled. I shared small, revealing facts that contradicted the story Mom was telling. Not accusations, not dramatic reveals. Just steady truth that, over time, would look like a pattern to anyone paying attention. If Mom said I was reckless with money, I casually mentioned budget goals I'd set and met. If she called me selfish, I quietly listed ways I'd supported family obligations, dates, times, receipts, so that their version of events didn't hold up under scrutiny. I also created tiny, seemingly harmless incidents that exposed their double standards. My brother loved to boast about being the sensible one. I let him make promises in earshot of others, and then I recorded when he failed to follow through. Mom criticized my late nights, while she kept secrets about spending or favors. Little contradictions that, when gathered, painted a clearer picture than one angry speech ever could. Another part of the plan involved building allies outside the family. I reconnected with old friends and coworkers who remembered me outside of Mom's shadow. Their casual support, an offhand compliment, a public endorsement of my work, a comment about how independent I had become, served as social proof. People trusted third-party observations more than my own insistence. As these voices accumulated, Mom's narrative lost authority. Timing mattered. I waited for moments when the family would be most exposed: public gatherings, celebrations, or times when their behavior would naturally invite scrutiny. I never ambushed them. I created situations where their reactions became visible, and more importantly, consistent. If they responded with manipulation or entitlement in front of others, that response carried weight. I used technology carefully: emails, timestamps, and messages that couldn't be easily denied. I knew when to show something and when to hold it. Sometimes silence was the strongest leverage. When someone demanded an explanation, my refusal to engage forced them to explain themselves instead. It was a chess game where each piece moved only when it mattered. Most importantly, I kept my moral line clear. I refused to set traps that would harm anyone's safety or dignity. No lies, no blackmail, no public shaming designed to destroy. What I wanted was accountability, an honest reckoning for manipulation, not revenge that would make me the mirror image of those I resented. I wanted them to feel the weight of their choices, to lose the advantages they'd built on favoritism and fear, and to understand the cost of turning family into a weapon. There were practical steps, too. I tightened my finances, separated accounts, and made sure my legal and work documents were in order. If things got ugly, I wouldn't be left exposed. I also scheduled small moves like switching my phone plan, booking a longer trip, making career decisions that increased my independence and reduced their foothold in my life. Each practical change was a quiet statement. I was building a life that didn't rely on their approval. The plan wasn't about proving my strength in one grand gesture. It was about designing a slow, inevitable erosion of the structures that had bound me. I wanted their values, appearance, control, favoritism, to crumble under their own contradictions. I wanted neighbors and cousins to start noticing and asking questions. I wanted my brother's bluster to be met with facts. I wanted Mom to feel the hollow echo of authority when no one else answered her calls for allegiance. And as I worked, something else happened. The plan changed me. The careful, patient strategy sharpened my patience, clarity, and resolve. I felt less like a trapped child and more like an architect shaping my freedom. Where I once reacted, I now anticipated. Where I once felt small, I learned to occupy space with quiet certainty. There were nights I doubted myself. There were moments I wanted to explode and tell them everything, to confront them with raw truth. But I reminded myself of the stakes. True victory wouldn't be satisfying if it came at the cost of my integrity. So I waited. I probed, I recorded. I let their arrogance work against them. And in the silence between their plans and my actions, a new kind of confidence grew, one that wasn't loud or vengeful, but inevitable. The buildup felt slow, almost ritualistic. Yet beneath that slow burn was a certainty. When the time came to execute, it would be clean. It would be undeniable. Their house of control, built on secrets and double standards, would begin to show cracks. And once those cracks appeared, I knew, with a cold certainty, that they would spread.